We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Beis Meseches Menachos. This is Menachos Daf 12b. On the previous summit, there was a machlokas amuroim between Rav Huna and Rava by shirayim shechasru ben kmitza lahaktara. Let's say you have a karban mincha where the kometz was taken and then some of the shirayim, some of the remainder of that karban mincha went missing. So there is a manda amar that holds that in such a case the kometz is able to be burned on the mizbeach, but the shirayim are not eaten in such a case. And so the question between Rav Huna and Rava was that burning of the kometz on the mizbeach, is that considered, so to speak, a real burning of the kometz on the mizbeach, that it could create pigul? Let's say, for example, the person had in mind outside of the proper time, or, for example, that it could take it out of the category of me'ilah, that burning of the kometz on the mizbeach is effective to take the remainder outside of the category of me'ilah, and that was a machlokas, again, between Rav Huna and Rava said that, in fact, the burning of that kometz is considered an effective burning of that kometz. It does take it out of the category of me'ilah. It would be able to render it pigul. And Rava said, I can bring a proof to this from our Mishnah, because in our Mishnah, the way Rabbi Chia learned our Mishnah, he takes out the words o kezayis, and Rashi here continues and explains, o kezayis, tekevan de machsheves gimel avodos halolu, mukminan b'shekvar chosru hashirayim v'yomdu al kezayis. Since by the three avodos, Rashi here is referring to the subsequent avodos, the avodos that take place after the kometz, since there we can be talking about a case where the remainder was chaser, some of it went missing, and it was just a kezayis. Hilkach lo matzi lemisnei o kezayis mikomso lemachar dumya de shirayim. The problem is, the reason why Rav Chia didn't want to have o kezayis is because you can't have o kezayis talking about a case by the kometz, where the kometz is missing. Dim chiser kometz b'shas machshava kvar psula, because if the kometz already went missing at the time of the machshava, that would already be disqualified. V'lo mivgol mincha bahi machshava, and then the karban mincha would not be disqualified through that machshava. Hilkach kevan de lo misni le o kezayis mikomtza, since it's impossible to have the words o kezayis mikomtza, because that would be a totally disqualified mincha, there wouldn't be pigul. So lo tana kezayis b'shirayim, that's why Rabbi Chia took out the word kezayis by the shirayim as well. V'reisha ki chasha b'kmitza de misni le o kezayis af b'kometz dahi vaday b'shalo chasra adayin mesukma afilu hachi kevan de seifo lo misni le hakometz, since at the end of the Mishnah we can't have that phrase going on the kometz, so lo tani le b'reisha afilu ashirayim. Even in the beginning of the Mishnah, Rabbi Chia took out that phrase, even by the shirayim, even by the remainder of the karban mincha. As the Gemara continues, we'll see an alternate girsa which will make more sense, but the Gemara continues, o kezayis ashirayim b'kmitza nami lechol shirayim lo tani o kezayis. Since you can't have o kezayis by the kmitza, so therefore we don't have kezayis at all. That's how Rabbi Chia understands the Mishnah. The girsa, the Mesoras Hashas here, girsa o kezayis b'kmitza, since the o kezayis b'kmitza is problematic, b'shirayim nami lotani, by the shirayim also. And the whole point over here in bringing the Mishnah is that the way Rabbi Chia understands the Mishnah, still it is clear that in the situation of shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara, in a situation where there is part of the shirayim that went missing after the kometz, Rabbi Chia fundamentally does agree that it can become pigul. He takes out the phrase because that can't apply in all the situations. It can't apply when it went chaser before the kometz was taken. But again, Rabbi Chia fundamentally seems to agree in his understanding of the Mishnah that by shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara, the burning of the kometz on the mizbeach is in fact effective in terms of pigul and in terms of taking it out of the category of me'ilah. As the Gemara continues, v'katani seifa pigul v'chayavan olav kares, and it says at the end of the Mishnah, again in these situations it is pigul, there is a liability of kares. Again, the burning of the kometz on the mizbeach is effective to create pigul, even though it's shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara. Alma, so we see mahanya luhu haktara, we see that the haktara is in fact effective. That's Rava's proof from our Mishnah. And the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya, Abaya said to him, he said to Rava, and the gears of the Bach over here is Liolam lo mahanya, really haktara, really the burning is not going to be effective. In the case of shirayim shechasru ben kamitza lahaktara, the burning of the kometz is not going to create pigul. And what is the reason why Rabbi Chia has an alternate girsa to our Mishnah? It's because Rabbi Chia's brayse is actually Rabbi Lazar here. Rabbi Chia is following Rabbi Lazar. T'tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah, this is a Mishnah Meseches Vachim, hakometz v'alavona v'aktoras u'minchas kohanim u'minchas kohen Mashiach. Mashiach, uminchas nesachim by the komets, by the fistful of the karban mincha, and by the lavona, the frankincense, by the ketoris, which is the incense, and minchas kohanim is the mincha of kohanim, and minchas kohen Mashiach is the mincha of the kohen gadol, and minchas nesachim is the mincha that accompanies an animal carbon together with libations. Shehikrev mayachas mehen kazayis bachutz. If from one of them a kazayis is offered outside, chayiv, then there's liability. Rebbe Lozer poter ad sheyakrev eskula, and Rebbe Lozer, he says exempt until the whole thing is offered. And the real reason of Reb Chia was kevan de haktoras kmitza lo masni leo kazayis mikumtza bachutz. Since by the burning of the komets, Reb Chia couldn't teach that a kazayis from the komets was burned bachutz. So b'shirayim nami lo masni leo kazayis. So by the shirayim as well, Reb Chia didn't bring the words o kazayis, and that has nothing to do with our Mishnah. As Rashi explains, Amar le Abaye le Rav, Abaye said to Rav, Liolam mid Reb Chia lo mashma demas nisan ma'ar bechisaron. You can't learn from Reb Chia's brisa that our Mishnah is talking about a case of chisaron, that our Mishnah is talking about a case of shirayim shechasru. Dahainu taima de lotani Reb Chia o kazayis bebrisa didei. The real reason why Reb Chia in his brisa did not have the words o kazayis is because his brisa was following the sheet of Rebbe Lozer. Rebbe Chia was following Rebbe Lozer. The lo chashav haktara at sheyakter kulu. It's not called a haktara for a different reason. It's not called haktara until the entire thing is burned. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Zvachim, hakomets de minchas Yisrael, the komets of a minchas Yisrael, v'halavona shal mincha, and the frankincense of a mincha, v'haketora shebechol yom, and the incense every day. Uminchas Kohen Mashiach, which is Chavise Kohen Gadol, that's the Chavisin of the Kohen Gadol. Nami Ksibbe Kolil Tukter, it all has to be burned. Uminchas Nesachim, and by Minchas Nesachim, Nami Kolil He, it's all burned. At Sheyakter is Kulu, it all has to be burned. The point is, Alma Lo Choshev Haktara Bekazayis. According to Rebbe Lozer, it's not called Haktara, it's not called being burned on the Mizbeach when one just burns a Kazayis. Hilkach Lo Tani Reb Chia O Kazayis B'Masnisa. That's why Reb Chia doesn't have the words O Kazayis in his Brisa, Afilu B'Shirayim, even by the remainder case. Kevan de v'kmitza lo misni leo kazayis, since by the komets he couldn't have o kazayis, kilomar bahaktaras kmitza, meaning by the burning of the komets, so lo motzi lemisni masnisa hakomets amanas lahakter kazayis mikum salamocher, he couldn't have it say that by the komets, if he has intention to burn a kazayis from the komets tomorrow, the holo mefagalbach, it wouldn't be pigel in that way. The lo choshev kaktara gemur, it's not called a haktara if just a kazayis is burned. Hilkach lav machshav. Therefore, that's not considered to be machshava, that's not considered to be the intention, and that's why Rebbe Chia takes out the words o kazayis, but it does not mean that in our Mishnah we are talking about shirayim shechasru. It doesn't mean that by shirayim shechasru in our Mishnah, again, ben kmitza lahaktara, that the haktara would be effective. But the Gemara continues and asks on this, Rebbe Lozer, but if we're going to say that the Bryce of Rebbe Chia is following Rebbe Lozer, Hai lahakter komsa, why does it say in the Bryce to burn the komets? Lahakter komsa ulavon to mi boile. It should say to burn the komets and the lavona, because it's only by burning both that one can create pigel. The Tanan, as we learned in the Mishnah in Zvachim says, Ha komets v'halavona shikr ves echon mehen b'chutz chayev, by the komets or the lavona, if from one of them it's offered outside of the azara, then one is liable. Rebbe Lozer poter at sheyakrev eshneim, but Rebbe Lozer says exempt until both of them are offered outside, and so therefore the Brisa of Rebbe Chia should mention both the komets and the lavona. And the Gemara continues and answers, Lo nitzrucha el lekomets de minchas chote. What Rebbe Chia's Brisa was talking about was the komets of the minchas chote, the komets of the mincha of the sinner, and in that situation there is no lavona, that's why only the komets is mentioned. The Gemara asks, Vichvel tana lashmin on komets de minchas chote, is the Tana of the Brisa going to go to the trouble of just teaching us about the komets of the minchas chote? And the Gemara says, in yes, v'chein kiyasar Rav Dimi amar Rebbe Lozer. Similarly, when Rav Dimi came, he said that Rebbe Lozer said, komets de minchas chote. This Brisa is talking about the komets of the minchas chote for Rebbe Lozer, and it is Rebbe Lozer. And so to summarize Rava's proof from the Brisa of Rebbe Chia and the Mishnah, and then Abaye's counter to that proof, Rava says that the reason why Rebbe Chia takes out the words kazayis in the Brisa is because in the end cases of the Brisa, the end cases of the Mishnah, there we're talking about the avodos after the kmitza, and by the avoda after the kmitza, it's possible that if you have the word kazayis in there, what that means is we're talking about shirayim shechasru liachar kmitza. We're talking about a situation where the komets of the mincha is taken, and then the shirayim are chasru, the shirayim are missing some of that remainder. And so in such a situation, we can understand that the Mishnah is is saying that when those avodos are done with an intention of pigul, we're going to say that that intention is going to be effective to create pigul. Because again, as Rava says, by shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara, we say that the burning of the kometz on the mizbeach is effective to create pigul. And therefore, since that part of the Mishnah would be understood as shirayim shechasru, you'd have to understand that the entire Mishnah is talking about chaser, but you can't understand, for example, that the part of the Mishnah that's talking about the kometz being a kazayis, that's chaser, because that would be totally disqualified. That would not be a situation of pigul. And so therefore, Rebbe Chia felt it's better to just take out the word kazayis, and that way you don't have to have kazayis through the entire Mishnah in the problematic areas of the Mishnah. And all of that again assumes that in the avodos after the kometz, again, if you have shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara, again that haktara would be effective to create pigul. That's how Rava understood the Brais of Rebbe Chia, and that's why it was a proof to Rava's position. And to that proof, Abaya countered that there can be an entirely different reason why Rebbe Chia took out kazayis. The reason why Rebbe Chia took out kazayis from the Brisa is because the Brisa is following the opinion of Rebbe Lozer, and Rebbe Lozer holds in general, in order to create pigul, the entire kometz has to be burned on the mizbeach with a machshavas pigul. It's not enough for just a kazayis of the kometz to be burned with a machshavas pigul, and that's why Rav Chisda takes the word kazayis out of the Brisa, and therefore it has nothing to do with shirayim shechasru bein kamitza lahaktara. And the Gemara continues, Hadarama Rava, then Rava retracted what he said, and he said, Lav milsi diamri, what I said is not actually true. And Rashi explains, Lav milsi diamri devadei lo mahanyelu aktara l'shirayim shechasru. Again, in a situation of shirayim shechasru, if you have shirayim, that some of it went missing between kamitz and haktara, in such a situation, again, as we said, the shirayim are not going to be eaten, but the kometz is burned on the mizbeach, but that burning of the kometz on the mizbeach is certainly not going to create pigul, and it is certainly not going to remove the shirayim from the category of me'ilah. And the Gemara continues, the Tanya, as we learned in the following Brisa, Kodesh Kodashim Hi, it says by the Lechem Aponim, Kodesh Kodashim Hi, and we learn from there, She'im Nifrsa Achas Mehen, Chalosea Kulan Psulos, that if one of the loaves of the Lechem Aponim, if it breaks, that's talking essentially about a case of chaser, then they are all disqualified. So the Brisa is saying by the Lechem Aponim, that chaser is a disqualification. HaYotzis, but let's say you have Yotzis, one of the loaves of the Lechem Aponim, leave the Beis HaMikdash, a case of Yotzei, Hani Deika Gavoy Kasheros, then those that are inside the Beis HaMikdash would still be kosher. In other words, there's a distinction between Yotzei and Chaser. And Man Shamatle Damar Zrika Moelis LeYotzei, who's the one that says that Zrika is effective by Yotzei when it leaves the Beis HaMikdash or when it leaves the proper area? Rabbi Akiva, that's what he said on the previous Amud. That's the Tana Rabbi Akiva. V'kamar Nifer Solo, and yet the Bryce is saying that Nifrsa is different, that in a situation of Chaser, we would say disqualified. And again, the point is that according to Rabbi Akiva, there is a difference between Yotzei and Chaser, even though Rabbi Akiva says Zrika Moelis LeYotzei, still when it comes to a situation of Chaser, which is an intrinsic disqualification, there we're going to say that Zrika is not Moelis, and just like Zrika is not Moelis, the same thing is going to be true by the burning of the kometz, again in a situation of Shirayim Shechasru, Bein Kamitza LaHaktara, the Haktaras HaKometz, the burning of the kometz, is not going to be effective. And Rashi explains, He belechem aponim ksiv, this pasuk is written by the lechem aponim, ki kodesh kodashim hilo, psulos, they are disqualified again by chaser v'yisrafu when they're burned, but hanach de gavoy kasheros, but in a situation of yotzei, when one of the loaves leaves the Beis HaMikdash, the loaves that are inside are kosher. Afagav de lo have haktoras bazichin kasher, now even though the burning of the bazichin, the burning of the frankincense and the spoons is not kosher, ad shetei kol ha-mincha shleim, unless you have the whole mincha, unless you have yud beis chalo shel lechem aponim, all 12 loaves. Alma hachala diyatzia mahanyeluhu lemahava yud beis chalos. Nevertheless, you see that challah that left doesn't take away. It's still considered yud beis chalos ulachshure levazichin, and it's kosher. The burning of the frankincense of the bazichin ulishtaruye hanach ba'achila, to permit the others, those that are inside the mikdash ba'achila. And the point is alma. So we see from this brisa that zrika, when it comes to the throwing of the blood, kigon haktaras bazichin. In this case, the equivalent of the throwing of the blood is the burning of the frankincense of the bazichin, shehu b'mokam dam zvachim, because that's in the place of the blood of animal karbonos. And you see moelis liyotze, you see that it is effective, even in a situation of yotze, like over here by the lechem aponim, where one of the loaves leaves the Beis HaMikdash. Midachashav le bechlal yud beis chalos, because it's included among the 12 chalos. Alma mahanya haktara la'achshuve b'hadehanach, you see that the haktara was effective, afagav da asura ba'achila, even though it was asur ba'achila. The point is, you see, this is going according to to Rabbi Akiva. V'kamer, and yet it's saying nifrasa, that in a case where a loaf was broken, and that's a case of chaser, kulan psulos, apparently they are all disqualified, and it's not effective. Alma afilo de Rabbi Akiva, the point is we see, even according to Rabbi Akiva, to Amar Mahanya Haktar LaYotze, who says that Haktar can be effective in situations of Yotze, Mide Chisaron La Mahanya Haktar, but in the case of Chisaron, it is not going to be effective, and that actually goes against what Rava said on the previous Amud. That is consistent with Rav Huna, but that by Shirayim Shechasru Ben Kamitza LaHaktara, the Haktara, the burning of the komets, is not going to be considered effective. But the Gemara continues, Amar le Abaya, Abaya said to him, he said to Rava, is this really a proof? Mikatani hayotzes, can we really make that inference? Does it really say that in a situation of Yotze it's different? This whole proof is trying to determine that this Bryce is Rabbi Akiva by saying in a situation of Chaser it's puzzle, and we can infer that in the case of Yotze it would be kosher. But Dilma, maybe you should make a different inference. Hanitmes hanach kesheros, maybe if one of the loaves became tameh, the others are kosher, and that would be for a different reason altogether. My time, what's the reason the maratz tzitz? That's because by tumah we say that the tzitz can affect acceptance. Avol yotzes lo, but let's say it left the Beis HaMikdash, maybe it wouldn't be kosher. And the Bryce of Rabbi Eliezer, the Bryce might be following Rabbi Eliezer. Damar ein zrika moelis liyotze, who says that zrika is not effective when it comes to yotze. Uvadinu di boile lemisnei nami yotzes, and really the Bryce didn't have to talk only about chaser; it could have talked about yotze as well. V'hai de katani nifrasa, the reason why the Bryce is specifically talking about where a loaf was broken, a case of chaser, hakamash malon, it's teaching us that afilu nifrasa, even in a situation where it's broken, where it's chaser, the isei bifnim, where at least it's inside the Beis HaMikdash, lo mahani le haktara, but the haktara is not going to be effective, but really the haktara won't be effective for yotze as well. And if we would learn the brisa like that, then we would say afal Rabbi Akiva, but then maybe according to Rabbi Akiva, damar zrika moelis li yotze, who says that zrika is effective in cases of yotze, so afilu chisaron nami mahani le haktara, then maybe by chisaron as well, in a situation of shirayim shechasr ben kmitz la haktara as well, the haktara, the burning of the komets, would be effective. And Rashi explains, mi katani yotzes kasher, does it say in this brisa that if one of the loaves left the Beis HaMikdash, it's kosher to tamer Rabbi Akiva, then we would be able to say that this brisa is Rabbi Akiva. Dil mahachi dok mine, maybe we should infer from the brisa as follows: hanitma achas chavroseh ksheros, that if one of the loaves become tamei, it's kosher. Da tumah hatzitz meratz, because by tumah we find that the tzitz can affect acceptance. Aval yotzes, but when something leaves the Beis HaMikdash or leaves the proper area, the ein tzitz meratz ala yotze, there's no concept of the tzitz affecting acceptance by yotze. Lo meskashri nach degavoy, then the other ones inside wouldn't be kosher. Mishum deleka haktar al yod beis chalos, because then you don't have a haktara, you don't have a burning over 12 chalos, da chasru lehu, because you have a chisar and you have some missing. And then for Rabbi Eliezer, he damar leil ein zrika moelis biyotze. Then what we would say is that the Bryce is following Rabbi Eliezer, that zrika is not moelis biyotze. Uvedindi boilu lemisni naamishim yotzes achas men kulim psulos, and the Bryce could have said yotze as well. We would say puzzle, but again, we don't say that because we want to say a chiddush by chaser. And again, the point is then that according to Rabbi Akiva, as the Gemara said, according to Rabbi Akiva, that zrika is moelis liyotze, it could very well be that by chisaron as well, haktara would be effective. And that opinion of Rabbi Akiva would then be in line with what Rava said on the previous Amud. And the Gemara continues with the Mishnah, if when the avod of a karban mincha is being done, the intention is lechol kachatzi zayis, to eat a half a zayis, ulahaktir kachatzi zayis, and to burn a half a zayis, so then kosher, then it's kosher. That is not a disqualification, even though there was a wrong intention of consumption for a kazayis, but you're not mitzdarif if you don't combine the eating and the burning. She'ein achila v'haktar mitzdarfen, we don't combine the eating and the burning. And the Gemara says, time of the lechol ulahaktir, the reason why it doesn't combine is because there was a wrong intention for eating and a wrong intention for burning, and each was half a zayis, and those do not combine. Halechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol mitzdarif, but if it would be to eat, and to eat something that's not normally eaten, then apparently they do combine. But the Gemara asks, v'katani reisha, but that's not what it says in the beginning of the Mishnah, because in the beginning of the Mishnah earlier we said, lechol davar shedarko lechol ulahaktir davar shedarko lahaktir, that it has to be to eat something that its way is to eat it, or to burn something that its way is to burn it. Davar shedarko lechol, in it has to be something that the normal way is to eat it, yes. She'ein darko lechol, but if it's not the normal way to eat it, it, then no, we wouldn't say that. And Rashi explains, halechol chatzi zayis shirayim. For example, let's say he'd have the wrong intention on a half a zayis of the remainder of the mincha to eat it. Lechol chatzi zayis kometz, but then he also had intention to eat a half a zayis of the kometz of the fistful, which is not normally eaten. Dahainu davar she'ein darko lechol, the kometz is not generally eaten. Apparently mitzdarfen lifso, that machshava, that kind of intention, you could combine those two intentions, and there would be a disqualification in that case. She'ein darko lechol lo have machshava. But in the earlier Mishnah it said that if it's something that it's not normal to eat it, and he has a machshava about eating it outside the proper time, that's not considered a real intention. Im chishav lo'ochlu l'machar, if he had intention to eat it tomorrow outside of the proper time. V'kevan lo have machshava, and if it's not considered a real intention, lo mitzdarfen lifsol, it certainly wouldn't combine in order to create that disqualification. And the Gemara says, Ma'antana, who's the author of the Sefer, who's the author of this Mishnah? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Hamani Rabbi Eliezer, who's the author of this Mishnah? It's Rabbi Eliezer. The Amar Mechashvin me'achilas adam la'achilas mizbeach. He says, one can have a machshava from something that's really achilas adam, it's supposed to be eaten by people, but he can have a machshava in terms of the consumption of the mizbeach. And the reverse as well, me'achilas mizbeach la'achilas adam, something that generally is consumed by the mizbeach, but if he has intention of achilas adam, again, outside the proper time, that could create pigul, and that's exactly what this Mishnah is saying. This Mishnah is saying if he has intention, a half a zayis lechol, something that normally is eaten, and a half a zayis lechol, something that isn't eaten, they can combine. And where do we find Rabbi Eliezer the Tanan, as we learned in a Mishnah coming up? Hakom metzes hamincha, if somebody takes the fistful of a karba mincha, lechol davar she'ein darko lechol, with the intention to eat something that's not normally eaten, or lahaktir davar she'ein darko lahaktir, or to burn something that's not normally burned, again, outside the proper time, outside the proper place, kosher, it is still going to be kosher because it's not normal to eat this thing and the machshava was about eating, or it's not normal to burn this on the mizbeach and the machshava was about burning on the mizbeach. However, Rabbi Eliezer posel, Rabbi Eliezer says posel because he says mechashvin me'achilas adam la'achilas mizbeach and vice versa, and therefore again our Mishnah here is Rabbi Eliezer. Abaye Amar Abaye says afilu temer rabbanan. One can even say that the Mishnah is the rabbanan, and lo tema, don't make the inference halechol v'lechol davar shein darko lechol. The Mishnah does not mean that if one had intention to eat a half a zayis of something that's normally eaten and a half a zayis of something that's not normally eaten, that combines. That's not what the Mishnah means. Ela rather say the Mishnah means halechol v'lechol davar shedarko lechol. It's eating and eating. It's all things that are normally eaten. As Rashi explains, Elaima halechol v'lechol davar shedarko lechol kagon. For example, the Mishnah means kachatzi zayis bachutz, kachatzi zayis lamachar. Let's say the remainder of the karba mincha, which is normally eaten, and he has in mind the half a zayis he's going to eat it outside the proper place, and a half a zayis he's going to eat tomorrow outside the proper time. Those can combine. Mitzdarfen lifsol. Those are able to combine, even though one machshava was outside the proper place and one machshava was outside the proper time. But the Gemara continues and asks, "Umay kamashmalan." But if that's the case, what is that really teaching us? Habehedya katanila, that's already taught. It says lechol kazayis bachutz ukazayis lamachar, kazayis lamachar ukazayis bachutz. If he has intention to eat a kazayis outside the proper place and a kazayis tomorrow outside the proper time, or the reverse, a kazayis again first an intention, a kazayis tomorrow outside the proper time, then having intention a kazayis outside the proper place, or kachatzi zayis bachutz ukachatzi zayis lamachar. Same thing by half a zayis. He has an intention to have a half a zayis outside the proper place and a half a zayis tomorrow. Kachatzi zayis lamachar, kachatzi zayis bachutz, or the reverse. First he has an intention, a half a zayis tomorrow outside the proper time, and then a half a zayis outside the proper place. In all of these cases, pasal vein bo kares, it's disqualified. There's no kares, we say in these cases, since there's an intention outside the proper place, along with the intention outside the proper time, but still there is a disqualification. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph.